The fluorescent light flickered above the courtroom like a warning siren, casting jagged shadows across the pale, trembling face of Emily Parker. Her fingers clutched the wooden bench as if letting go meant surrendering her life. The room was silent, but in that silence, fear screamed louder than any shout. Across the aisle, the man she had seen, the one who had taken everything from her, sat smugly behind the defense table, his eyes cold and calculating, daring her to speak. Emily's voice, barely a whisper, dissolved into the vast emptiness of the room. Every instinct screamed to run, but the law demanded she stay. Her heart pounded like a war drum, each beat felt like a countdown. She could feel the weight of the villain's gaze slicing through her, reminding her of every lie, every threat, every cruel moment he had imposed on her life. She had wanted justice, but courage was a stranger today. The judge's gavel hovered in the air, a symbol of authority that should have made her feel safe. Instead, it felt like a hammer over her fragile resolve. Her legs shook violently under the bench. She was a bird trapped in a cage, wings clipped by terror. Around her, the courtroom was full of people, but none could understand the storm raging inside her. She knew the moment she opened her mouth, she might unleash a force she wasn't ready to control. And then, a low, distant rumble pierced through the tension, a sound foreign to this solemn room, yet familiar to anyone who had witnessed true power and loyalty. The sound of engines. Metal meeting asphalt, leather creaking, chains humming with anticipation. Emily froze, her wide eyes searching for the source. The glass doors at the back of the courtroom trembled as if the building itself held its breath. 10 figures emerged, their presence commanding, their steps synchronized. Leather jackets glinted under the harsh lights, and tattoos told stories of battles fought and honor upheld. Their engines purred a promise, protection, vengeance, justice. Emily couldn't believe her eyes. The bikers, a living force of courage and defiance, had come not for themselves, but for her. In that instant, hope sparked in the deepest corners of her terror-stricken heart. The man across the room noticed too, and for the first time, doubt shadowed his smirk. Emily still couldn't speak. But she didn't have to. They understood. And the room would never be the same again. Emily Parker had always been the kind of girl who disappeared into the background, quiet, diligent, and unassuming. At 16, her world was supposed to be filled with school projects, weekend sleepovers, and the ordinary dramas of teenage life. Instead, it had become a nightmare she could never escape. It had started innocuously enough, a tutor showing extra attention, a neighbor being too friendly, a stranger's smile that lingered too long. But soon, the harmless gestures twisted into threats, manipulation, and intimidation. Every time Emily tried to tell someone, the consequences escalated. Rumors, veiled threats, and subtle harassment ensured that no one would believe a frightened teenager. The man she now faced in the courtroom was cunning, meticulous, and terrifyingly patient. He had spent years building walls around her truth, turning every attempt at help into shame and fear. Her parents, once confident and protective, were drained by the constant battle. They had gone from being fierce advocates to cautious observers, unsure how to shield their daughter from a predator who always seemed one step ahead. Emily learned early on to hide her fear behind a fragile mask, to smile when asked, to pretend that the late-night phone calls, the shadow in the doorway, and the whispered warnings weren't unraveling her mind piece by piece. School became a minefield. Hallways that should have been safe were arenas of anxiety. Each classroom held the unspoken possibility of a confrontation, each glance could betray her to someone who wanted to see her falter. Friends drifted away, unable or unwilling to understand the constant tension that governed her every step. By the time the police got involved, Emily's voice had been silenced for so long that even her own courage felt foreign. The trial was supposed to be the turning point, the day she could finally reclaim her story. But fear had become a cage, one forged not from iron or steel, but from doubt and terror. Emily knew every word she might say could be twisted, mocked, or used against her. Every second in that courtroom was a reminder of how fragile her safety truly was, how alone she had felt, even when surrounded by adults who were meant to protect her. And yet, deep down, she held onto a fragile ember of hope, a whisper that justice could exist, that someone, somewhere, might arrive and finally turn the tide. She didn't know it yet, but that hope was about to ignite. Outside the courtroom, the rumble of engines had been growing louder each day, a signal that the world wasn't as indifferent as it seemed. The bikers who were about to enter her life carried not just power, but a code, an unspoken promise that the helpless would be shielded, that fear would no longer have the final word. Emily's hands were trembling on the edge of the bench, her mind a whirlwind of memories and dread. She had survived this long by keeping quiet, by blending into shadows. But the shadows were shifting now. And with them, the possibility of a life where she could finally feel safe, finally feel brave, finally speak. The courtroom air grew heavier with each passing minute, suffused with a tension that seemed to press Emily against the wooden bench. Across the room, the man she feared radiated confidence, his voice smooth as silk as he whispered to his lawyer. Every smirk, every controlled gesture reminded her of the countless times he had manipulated those around her, turning allies into doubters, witnesses into skeptics. He wasn't just a man, he was a storm in human form, relentless and unpredictable. Every threat he had made in the past, subtle warnings, veiled intimidation, whispered promises of ruin, now echoed in the room like a haunting refrain. The judge's attempts to maintain order barely registered in Emily's mind. She could see the growing impatience in the defense team, the calculated glances exchanged as if plotting her defeat before it even began. Emily's courage faltered. She could feel it slipping, draining away like water through clenched fists. Every instinct screamed to hide, to retreat into the corners of her mind where she could pretend the danger didn't exist. Yet the courtroom was no sanctuary, it was a stage where the villain thrived, where her silence became a weapon against her own truth. Outside the walls of the building, the world seemed indifferent. Friends were distant, authorities cautious, and the invisible eyes of the predator seemed to follow her every movement. The man's reach felt endless, as if no corner of Emily's life was untouched by his control. He had perfected fear, transforming it into a barrier stronger than any lock or chain. And yet, beneath the dread, a new vibration began, a resonance that she couldn't yet place. The low hum of engines in the distance, persistent and steady, hinted at a force that didn't bend to fear or cruelty. For the first time, Emily noticed it, felt it in her chest, a heartbeat of defiance that didn't belong to her alone. Somewhere beyond these walls, justice was stirring, gathering strength, preparing to shatter the oppressive weight that had held her captive for so long. The villain didn't notice it yet. He was too consumed by his own arrogance to see that the tide was about to turn. But Emily did. And for the first time in years, the thought of help, real, unstoppable help, sent a shiver of hope racing through her veins. The first rumble hit like thunder, reverberating through the courtroom walls and shaking the wooden benches beneath Emily's trembling hands. Heads turned instinctively toward the glass doors at the back, but no one was prepared for what came next. The doors burst open, and a wave of raw power rolled in, 10 bikers, each one a living emblem of strength, loyalty, and unyielding justice. Their leather jackets glimmered under the harsh fluorescent lights, each adorned with symbols and tattoos that told silent stories of battles fought and won. Helmets in hand, they exuded authority, not the authority of the law, but the authority of those who refused to let evil go unchallenged. Engines still growling, they stepped in unison, a synchronized force that seemed to bend the very air around them. Emily's breath caught in her throat. These were no ordinary men, they were protectors, warriors forged from loyalty and courage, and they had come for her. Every detail of their entrance was calculated, deliberate, the slow stomp of boots against the polished floor, the confident swing of a helmet, the piercing glances exchanged like silent signals. The leader, a tall man with eyes like steel and a jaw hardened by years of battle, paused for a moment near the back of the room. He scanned the courtroom, taking in the villain's smug expression, the anxious murmurs of the onlookers, and finally, Emily's pale, terrified face. He nodded slightly, as if to say, "We've got you." The rest of the bikers formed a protective circle around her, their presence alone reshaping the atmosphere. The villain's smirk faltered, his confidence wavering as he realized the magnitude of what had just entered his carefully controlled world. The room, once dominated by fear, now quivered under the weight of impending justice. They didn't speak immediately. Words were unnecessary. Every step they took, every measured movement, conveyed a message louder than any courtroom argument: we are here. You will not win. Emily felt her chest lift for the first time in years. The cage of fear she had been trapped in seemed to crack, letting light seep in. The bikers' unity was palpable. They exchanged nods and brief hand gestures, a silent language forged over years of friendship, loyalty, and countless battles fought side by side. They didn't just fight for themselves, they fought for the innocent, for those whose voices had been silenced by intimidation and cruelty. Today, Emily's silence would end, because they refused to allow fear to dictate her story. One of the bikers, younger but with a presence that radiated courage, leaned slightly toward Emily and whispered, "You don't have to do this alone. We're with you." Her eyes filled with tears, not just from relief, but from the realization that true allies existed in a world that had seemed indifferent for far too long. The villain rose slightly in his seat, attempting to reclaim dominance. But the bikers' unwavering stance, their silent promise of retribution and protection, left no room for intimidation. The balance of power had shifted, and every heart in the room sensed it. For Emily, hope had arrived not in whispers or promises, but in roaring engines, unwavering loyalty, and a team that would not let her face the storm alone. The courtroom had transformed from a place of judgment into a battleground of courage versus fear. The villain, once untouchable in his arrogance, now faced a force that defied every rule he had relied upon for control. The bikers stood like statues of defiance, surrounding Emily with an invisible shield of steel and conviction. Every eye in the room was fixed on the unfolding tension, every breath held as if afraid to disturb the moment. Emily felt her voice tremble, but the presence of the bikers gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. The judge's gavel echoed faintly in the background, but the real power in the room was no longer the law, it was the truth, amplified by unyielding courage. The villain rose, attempting his usual theatrics, a confident smirk, a threatening glare, a whisper meant to shatter Emily's newfound resolve. "You think a few motorheads can change anything?" he hissed, his voice sharp, venomous. "You're just a scared little girl hiding behind loud engines." The room seemed to freeze. Emily's knees trembled, but she drew in a steadying breath. One of the bikers, the leader, stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding, echoing through the stunned silence. "This isn't about engines, and it isn't about us. It's about right and wrong. And you? You've gone too far. You've stolen years of fear from someone who deserved a chance to live free. Not anymore." The villain's smirk faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his eyes. The bikers moved in sync, circling subtly, their presence tightening like a noose around his arrogance. He tried to raise his voice, but every attempt at intimidation was met with quiet, unshakable authority. They didn't shout, they didn't need to. Their mere existence, their silent code of justice, was enough to strip away the layers of his control. Emily found her own voice, small at first but growing stronger with every word. "I'm not scared of you anymore. I'm not alone." Her eyes met each biker in the circle, drawing strength from their unwavering presence. The courtroom felt alive, charged with a raw energy that had been missing for years. The villain's power waned under the collective force of loyalty, bravery, and truth. In a final, desperate attempt, he lunged verbally, trying to twist the facts, to turn the witnesses, to claim dominance one last time. But the bikers moved decisively. Calm, controlled, they didn't need violence, they needed exposure. Phones and cameras from the courtroom captured every smirk, every faltering gesture, every crack in his facade. The public record became a mirror reflecting his true nature, unmasking the predator for all to see. The villain slumped in his chair, defeated not by fists, but by courage, unity, and the unwavering resolve to protect the innocent. Emily's fear evaporated, replaced by a rush of relief, gratitude, and the first sparks of true empowerment she had felt in years. She could finally breathe, finally reclaim the life that had been stolen. The bikers remained silent, their eyes softening only as Emily's voice grew steady, recounting the truth that had been silenced for so long. Justice had arrived, not as a distant ideal, but as a living, breathing force of loyalty, strength, and unwavering moral courage. The courtroom, once heavy with tension and fear, now seemed lighter, almost serene. Emily sat with her shoulders straight for the first time in years, a small, genuine smile curving her lips. The villain had been exposed, his threats rendered meaningless, and the weight of years of terror lifted, leaving her feeling almost unrecognizably free. The bikers, still standing silently around her, exchanged brief nods and subtle gestures, a language of loyalty and understanding only they could speak. Their presence had been the shield she never knew she needed, the silent promise that she would not face the storm alone. They didn't linger unnecessarily, for their work wasn't about recognition or applause, it was about justice. Emily's parents rushed forward, enveloping her in a protective embrace. Tears flowed freely, not from fear this time, but from relief and gratitude. The courtroom onlookers murmured in awe, some inspired, others shaken by the raw display of courage and solidarity. Yet, for Emily, the moment was intimate, personal, and transformative. Without a word, the bikers mounted their engines, their movements fluid and practiced. The rumble of the machines resonated like a heartbeat through the building, a final exclamation of their presence. Emily watched as they rode away, a team of unsung heroes disappearing into the horizon, leaving behind the proof that courage could manifest in the unlikeliest forms, and that hope could arrive with roaring engines and unwavering loyalty. As the doors closed behind them, Emily whispered to herself, "I can finally be brave." The world outside the courtroom no longer felt like a place of shadows and fear, it felt alive with possibility, with justice, with the promise that fear could be confronted and overcome. Her journey wasn't over, healing never is, but for the first time, she faced the future with her head held high, knowing she was no longer alone. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more powerful stories.